suited section, all for a fixed around. Visit signature.co.nz today. Okay, whānau. I've been having a to-do with my settings, and so I'm going to have to just keep it unmute. Sorry, just so you can hear it from the speaker. I'm not too sure what's happening with my settings. Usually I can mute and you can hear it, but this time you can't. But it's an important interview, so it's important for you to listen to. The other thing I wanted to say as well is that my last video, interesting enough, so the videos that I've been doing this week on around the sovereignty of our data, which leads on from the sovereignty of our tinana. Facebook is coming down on me pretty hard, so I may have to delete the last live. So if you haven't watched it or watched it through, I suggest I'll keep it up for a little bit longer. I have been warned by Facebook. But I want to do this live in particular, and it's an interview today by the platform who are interviewing Brian Tamaki, and it's an excellent interview. So I'm just going to share. Okay, where are we? I'm just going to share it. Listen to this, whānau, it's awesome. I want to welcome to the program our guest. For the next period of time, don't know how long, let's see how the chat goes. And that is Brian Tamaki of Destiny Church. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the platform this afternoon.
My pleasure, Paul.
Okay, we're seeing in the news counter protests, people complaining about motorways being blocked, freedom protests. There have been a few right now. Indeed, I went on one in Auckland, I'll say that, and I found it a very lovely affair, and I really mean that. So, first of all, where do we start? I'm going to ask you why it's all happening and everything, but the reaction, the grumpy reaction to what you're doing, how do you take that?
Fairly well used to it now, because I've been around for a while. I just take it as a grain of salt, and doesn't faze me really. People are entitled to their opinions and what they think about the way things are going in the country or their lives. So I just stick to what we've got to do, and that's what I do.
I've asked a few people this question before. I'd be interested to get your answer. Are we in a battle for our country, like a real battle? Is that a way to put it?
Absolutely 100% correct. We're in the battle for the soul of our country. And I think you're all aware now that probably this is the worst government we've ever had. And it's also the worst opposition we've ever had. So really we have nobody in the political establishment in Wellington that's battling for everyday hard-working Kiwis.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of complaints about being held up on motorways in Parliament. We couldn't get a park in Buckle Street. Does it surprise you that people, and I've mentioned this before, have such low thresholds for measuring their freedom? What about parks?
Well, that's the one protest I wasn't allowed at. As you know, I was under 24-hour curfew at that time after being released from prison. But yes, there's the low tolerance level. Well, as I was saying with the Newmarket mall complaining about not getting the business, look, I think it's only all about an hour, maybe at the height of it, that the business might be affected. But Jacinda Ardern's, I think she's closed down something like 60,000 plus businesses and jobs in her term of government, and those jobs and businesses have collapsed or gone forever. I think they need to be really looking at what's stopping their business altogether, and that's this government. And that's where their hard times are coming for our business sector, and many other sectors of society are suffering, as we can see.
When did you decide that, well, obviously you decided you had to do something. What were the circumstances of that? What
took you to that level, and what made you decide, okay, we've got to push the go button, we've got to start something?
I think it came when last October in 2021, prior to the first protest that I think most of the public had seen. I decided then, after seeing, it was level 4, that the city of Auckland had been shut down, if you all remember the border, put around the city of Auckland, and I think it was some 60 plus days, trapped or hemmed in. And we also were on level 4, so we had very extreme restrictions. And at that point, I think the people's emotional and mental thresholds were bursting at the point. And I started to see my country, the New Zealand I grew up in, as being something that I've never imagined it could ever be, being totally remade by, and this government's been doing it. And I didn't want my children to grow up in that. And I thought about my kids. I've got 10 grandchildren from my 3 adult children. I'm married. And I've got 3 great-grandchildren. And I thought, if I don't stand up for them, then I'm culpable as well with the government and allowing them to get away with it without somebody voicing or saying something. And I remember talking to a group of people. At the end of the day, most of them wouldn't stand at the level 4 in October then, when the most severest time. But I thought, well, I have to stand now. And so the group of us, we tried our best to work with and cooperate with police requirements, which I did, masking and trying to distance, and stepped out there, and that's how it began. And then many protests later, I'm still standing, giving voice to our freedom and our rights, and a government that I believe is totally not just gone in the wrong direction, but is absolutely evil.
I was going to ask you about if the evil word applies. You just said
I used it.
You used it, yeah. And explain why that is evil.
Well, when you begin to distance yourself from the people and no longer realise that it is a democracy, the people voted you in there and trusted you with our future, with our lives, to make laws that would have an effect on us, our businesses and our livelihoods. And when you disengage and put distance between yourself, as politicians and parties and me now, and the people, you commit democratic treason. You actually are no longer working and caring and betting for the people. You are now a despot, a tyrannical government, and you've moved into totalitarian politics. And that's what we have. It's plain and clear. And by no means are we out of the dark and the woods, as to say. We still have some very oppressive restrictions in our lives. For instance, we have traffic lights still working. Traffic lights are made for cars, not for people. And yet they're still there. We're on traffic lights where we still have mandates that operate. That's totally unforgivable. All those mandates should be pulled off our frontline workers right now, and it solves some of the health problems and some of the frontline workers and the firemen now that are under the same oppressive rules and regulations, and our GPs having to import migrants. And there's a very rich, that's going to have huge negative outcomes as well in the future. But we still have the oppressive COVID-19 health response bill hanging over our heads. That's still alive, and they won't touch that because they know they can bring that out any time and bring us back into living with levels and lockdowns. So this country, New Zealand's need to wake up, and we need to start together, to come together and get our country back. And we, the people, are the ones who actually are in charge of our country, New Zealand. We're in Parliament, and the House and the grounds belong to the people, not to those politicians. And they've violated and they've stepped over the line a long time ago. And I believe that both National and Labour are culpable as well. National is too, and ACT and the Māori Party and Greens. None of them have done anything to step in and stand up for the voice, stand up and give voice for the people. Particularly when we were looking for some type of guidance and a voice from this government when the protesters were in Wellington, and 120 people in the House of Representatives called MPs or politicians, supposed to be serving the people, not one came out to talk or to listen even. And I believe that was when democracy, if it wasn't there then, it definitely died that day.
I want to ask you about some of the hits that you've taken recently, but I'm interested to get your view on, because you talked about, you know, what's being done, and you mentioned those primary services, health, fire and emergency, I guess doctors, medical system, more broadly, police obviously were forced to make choices whether they stayed in the force or had to go over mandates. Masks still in the fundamental food purchasing stores of New Zealand supermarkets. These are all basic security of life layers things. Everything else seems to be okay, but when it comes to the, you know, the stuff that really underpins the livability and the cohesion of a society, they're still excluded. How do we explain that? Why not everyone? Why just them?
Well, you talk about the necessities of life, Paul, and that's the very life link and life chain for people to live, for families. Fundamentally, families, we go to the basic unit of society, which is the family. That's the cornerstone of any nation. And when you start to starve them with the basics like food, shelter, the housing problems we have, and the Kiwi Bill debacle, when we look at job availability, now you have 100,000 people on the benefit, and there's an employee shortage, or there's a lack of workers, and then we open the gates to immigration. So you can see the mix-up, and this type of social and economic mix-up is all heading toward causing the pressure on our society to the point that they can continue to fast-track their agenda and turning New Zealand into a country that we all know does not belong here. And I think that's how they're going to do it. They're going to continue to apply that pressure until New Zealanders just accept it. Feed a little bit of false freedom. People are driving around, they go to their jobs, still can get away to the beach now. She's even opened the borders. It seems like she's been repentant, but she isn't. And neither is this government. And it's got worse, actually, because when you're blind to what we know has already happened to us, then there's nothing can open the blind eyes when people refuse to see it. And sometimes that's why we've had to have a drastic, well, our protests. I mean, we wouldn't have gone on the motorway if the police said no.
Right.
When we asked, they consented. They said yes, they would help us go on. So you couldn't help me but to say, well, okay, thank you. You know, because sometimes a protest has to be disruptive to get attention. I mean, if we're in a little corner where the shoppers want us to stay under a tree, I mean, there's no point in a protest going under a tree to ourselves. There has to be some discomfort to the comforts of everyday Kiwis, so we can just give them a little reminder, all is not well, and we need you and your voice and your person to be able to stand up and begin to join with us in facing up to this bully this government didn't, removing them. In fact, that's what needs to happen.
Okay, we can talk about that shortly. It just reminded me of the Springbok tour of 81, which I was involved in the protests of. Man, we blocked motorways multiple times, all the main roads in Wellington where I was. You know, way more than, I mean, it was a way different scale. How do you explain then, with your knowledge, and let's accept you've got a good knowledge of people, you've been dealing with people for a long time, the acceptance of these things and the popularity that's maintained by those who would impose these restrictions on what used to be, in my view anyway, was a freedom-loving country, a freedom-loving culture. Why do you think it's so acceptable to some or to many?
They That's a good question. By the way, I was there and you guys were doing all those protests. I was at actual rugby match. I was a rugby player.
Okay.
But anyway, that question's a good one because I think it goes in, it's a multiple answer really, and I don't want to sort of drag on, but I think the loss of values in this country is a big one. You know, when we talk about democracy, you hear Jacinda talk about protecting the democracy. Overseas, she said that. Whether she's deluded or she believes that democracy is still alive, and democracy has been in.
Well, what do you think, Brian? What do you think? Is she deluded, or is this a cunning plan? Or, I mean, how do you explain the positions, the behaviour?
It's a plan. There's a plan. Definitely a plan. She's not. Well, you've got to be deluded in the first place to accept her ideology is what drives our government. That's the problem with a lot of the politicians in the opposition. They're trying to deal with politics at a face level and arguing political policies and all this sort of stuff is one thing, but there's an ideological drive, and that's what really is hurting the country, and that's what's setting the pace for her to bring modernism, to buy out mainstream media. Good at what you're doing too, by the way, with the platform.
Thank you.
To buy and bribe mainstream media, and then use this modernism to then disseminate fear and mixed with a little bit of truth, you know, with the science of it and the pandemic and the whole viruses and then the variants. And now it gets to the point of being crazy like foot and mouth and monkeypox.
Yeah, and B. varroa is the next one.
Yeah, well, you add it up. I mean, any, you know, good-thinking person would see that all the crises that we have, you know, every institution is in crisis almost. Well, you've got to have an institution over that is in crisis itself, and that's what's happened. It's led by a government that's a crisis government. It's got crisis in it. The crisis didn't come from the ground up to the government. It's come from the government down to the ground. That's where the crisis has come. And same with the confusion of people's rights and freedoms being taken away, thinking that it's okay for a government or politicians that we vote in parties, we vote to protect the very fundamentals of democracy, which is our freedoms and our rights. So, you know, this delusion on the population means that maybe a little bit more hardship. I mean, until it cuts their pockets and their money, and then they might sit up and take notice that they need to put voice and stand together and get our country back. Most things can be put right, solved and healed all at once if we got rid of that government, and in fact, we probably dismissed or dissolved that whole political establishment and look out in society and get there some people that are decent, they're experts out here, they're better people with experience and competence, and who have compassion for our country, that are far better qualified to be in there than a lot that are in there now. And I mean, I can be more passionate here in the radio station by saying that, man, New Zealanders need to get up right now, stand up, and we need to get back our country and starting with Parliament. That's our house, and that's where our problems are coming from, and that's where our problems will be solved. But we've got to do something.
Well, the way you're speaking, it could be quite dramatic.
Very calm.
You've taken some pretty big hits over the time. You mentioned jail time before. Plenty of people have got their all in on their opinion of you. I would imagine virtually none of them have ever met you. It's usually the way. So for yourself, what sort of thinking have you had to do for yourself in sort of taking this on, for want of a better way of describing it?
It's been a big cost, even from the beginning when I actually involved, I didn't want to involve my church, and it's not a destiny thing, I never wanted that. In fact, we had 3 speakers on that first day the protest started on the 2nd of October in the Domain, and when the police had threatened us by the time we had 2 days of talks, that they'd probably be arrested. The other speakers pulled out, and I had to front up. My kids didn't want me to, by the way. They said, Dad, why should you stand up for half these people that criticise you all the time? And I said, well, I'm not just standing for them, I'm standing for you as well, and for you, my grandchildren. And people can criticise, they can say what they want. But, lions don't leave sleep over the opinions of sheep. And my stand has always been that people can say what they want. As long as I am happy and at peace with me, I can stand with me because I know I'm doing this for the right reasons. Certainly not for me, because nobody wants to go to prison. Nobody wants to be hated on. It's a very uncomfortable space to live in. But I've realised that if you're going to do something, particularly in New Zealand, you have to put your neck out. You have to stick your neck out. You have to put your head up. You have to stand. And I know as much as hate can be a focus and who's against you, I also know that courage is very contagious as well. And I believe the courage that me and many others, by the way, we stand together. I stand with others. It's not a Brian Tamaki thing, not a Destiny Church thing. And I'm certainly not getting anything out of this because I'm looking forward to going to a great big holiday, a fiction holiday after all this is finished. But, it's contagious. And I think courage is now beginning to seep into the hearts of many good, hard-working Kiwis, and they're starting to realise, if we don't do something now to get our country back, we may lose it forever. And I think that people are going to be ready tomorrow for a meeting down at the Domain, and in the South Island the following weekend on the 13th, and then we're heading for what I believe is going to be the biggest and probably the most significant protest in the history of New Zealand on the 23rd of August. It's the Tuesday. And on the Monday, there'll be another Kiwi road trip for people. Take a day off work and make history. Let's get our country back, and we'll drive from the top of the north to the bottom of the south and get a meet in Wellington. It was a very peaceful protest. The last one was brawn, this one's brains. We're there to engage with the opposition and get them working for once. They're supposed to be standing up for the people, the opposition, so we're going to challenge them.
Have you had any opposition politicians, Brian, contact you and sort of don't tell anyone, but, has that happened?
No, they feel too threatened by me.
Right.
Yeah, they can talk any time. In fact, I think they would jump on Labour's side to fight me, I reckon. They've pushed comes to shove. That's how deluded our politicians are presently. And that's shown by the cross-party
lockstep, I think, is a good word.
Is it? Yeah, well, they did.
Yeah, well, lockstep, yeah. And in terms of, I'm just interested also, and I want to ask you about jail in just a moment, because I've always been curious about what it'd be like. The police. Okay, so they said you could go on the motorway, but then they're saying that they could make arrests. What kind of messaging are you getting from the police? Is it sort of like a bob both ways, or they don't quite know where they fit in all of this? How have you interpreted their relationship with you?
I mean, I've always wanted to do. I'm a law-abiding citizen. As far as those laws are healthy for you, but when those laws or those policies don't, we all have a duty for civil disobedience. You don't obey any type of legislation or law from Parliament that's oppressive to the people or violates our federal rights. And it's our duty as a people to remove or abolish a government that does that. Now, when police stop serving the people, and that's what they're supposed to be doing, we pay their wages, not Jacinda or Willie or Chris Luxon. The taxpayers do. And so when the politicians take the police force and turn it into an enforcement squad for politicians and their agenda, that is the word evil I use there.
Yeah.
And the judicial system is the same. Our judicial system also needs to be, I think, rebuked for the way that it's not allowed justice to be carried out for the people of this country, and allowing politicians to be, I think, their final word, or obeying politicians over justice. And that's been seen because I've been in about 6 courtrooms with 6 different judges, maybe even 7, who have all pushed the Bill of Rights, kicked it to the curb, and have allowed this evil COVID-19 response health bill or emergency bill to take precedence over our freedoms and our rights. And now that's a crime against humanity. And yet in broad daylight, that's happened on a number of occasions, not just with me. And so when they warned me after putting a mask on, socially distancing on the 2nd of October, yes, at level 4, they agreed that I had a right to protest. If I kept the COVID response bill requirements, then to arrest me, I find that an injustice. And then when they arrested me, they gave me such extreme bail conditions. They thought I was one of those people that were shooting at houses and made crime sprees. And I couldn't move, and I wasn't allowed to go to a protest. I wasn't allowed to speak. I wasn't allowed to say anything online. And then they warned me they'd put me in prison if I went out and did it again. And of course, I said I'm not guilty. I'm attending a protest and I'm speaking to a mic, wearing a mask, and then taking it off when I need to, and then social distancing, and then you say you charge me on the basis that somebody in the crowd is not wearing a mask, so I'm responsible or culpable, and I'm prosecuted, and that makes it an illegal gathering. So that's how they were doing it. So the police were very, I would say, pedantic in crossing the line and agreeing with Crown ministers to actually arrest me. And in the end, they put me in prison.
What was that like? What was the prison experience like? I know it wasn't that long, but being incarcerated, having no right to walk out the door at the end of the day.
Put you in there one day for solitary confinement. You put you in there one day and I think you're just about crying for money. I don't know how the guys do it for 10 years or 20 years. I mean, yeah, I didn't want to go there and people say, oh, you broke the law. No, I didn't. That's what I'm trying to, I'm standing on the basis of my rights to protest and to speak. And if I capitulate to what they want, plead guilty and we'll just fine you or give you a smack on the hands and go away and stay in your house. Well, that's capitulating to this government, and that's what they've been doing to a huge proportion of this population. And no, you have to stand and you have to push back on them. Otherwise, they will continue to control and interfere with our lives. And that prison, I didn't want to go to prison. But if I back, unfortunately, as a catch-22, the people that were coming to the protest, it's hard to say, but they would have seen me as just like somebody else, the rest of them that just got the first little bit of punishment from the government, and then they disappear. And I decided I wasn't going to. I made that promise for my children and my grandchildren's future, and for my country and my flag, and my ancestors that died on World War II fields and foreign lands. For my freedom side.
That's the thing that gets me. People fought, laid down their lives, endured incredible hardship and an uncertain future, which could have been a horrible future. So we could be wrapped in cotton wool. And am I wrong? We forget about those people? Was it all for nothing?
No, and that's the problem with New Zealand. And I think that there needs to be a whole a new makeover for what we call Anzac Day, because I think there needs to be a renewed appreciation and gratefulness. And I had 7 ancestors that went over there, only 3 came back, and now the council is saying that we're blocked off from that area. I'm not allowed to go in there and desecrate it, apparently, and all this sort of stuff. So, I mean, I find that just totally wicked too, that a council, I mean, I should be able to go up there and stand next to it because of my ancestors. And by the way, on my Māori side, Te Wairahua is a part of the tribe originally that owned the Isthmus of Auckland. So here's these people sitting in council telling me I'm not allowed to go there. So there's a lot of fundamentals here. It's so wrong what we're doing to each other. And I think if all people would realise that the great price that the soldiers paid to get our freedom, just to be able to do what you want to do, go where you want to go, and be you. They gave their lives for us. And to see so many Kiwis now not appreciate that, allow so easily for a government that now is very blatant. This is blatant. I don't need to convince anybody on this radio station listening that this government is wrong. It is very bad for this country, and we should stop it sooner than later. Rather than wait for election, we should stop it. Never snap election. Get rid of them. In fact, get rid of National as well and the rest of them and start again.
Well,
no problems.
Brian, I really appreciate you making some time for us this afternoon and hearing firsthand your experience and what's happening out there from your point of view and the protest actions that you've been involved in. As I said, I attended one of them and I found it actually a very uplifting experience. There were families and just good people in there. There was an attempt to demonize it, but I had first-hand experience, and I'm a bit of an old protester myself, so I kind of knew what I was getting into. But thank you so much for coming on the program. I'm sounding a bit over-fawning, but I know you don't give out many interviews, so we really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us on the platform, okay?
Well, thank you, Paul, and I'll give an interview any day to you.
Oh, thank you. All right. Brian Tamaki, ladies and gentlemen, don't ever say we don't cover all the angles of the stories. Don't ever say that, because we do. That's an example.
Moving into just to finish up my life. So I really just wanted to warn you that I'm going to take down my live from today as I've received a notice from Facebook. So they're obviously keeping a very, very close eye on me. And I do need to protect my page. So after this live, so I've just done this live so that you're aware I'm going to take today's live down, the lunchtime live down, and I just wanted to share Brian Tamaki's interview with the platform. And the platform is now becoming the fourth estate, because they do. You may agree with them or you may not agree with them, but at least they follow all angles. And these are old journalists. These are old hats, been there, done that. And I follow them with an eager eye and an eager ear, as so should you. So whānau, gonna love yous and leave you. Kia pai tō pō. Have an awesome night. And we'll tune in again. Apopo. Kia ora, pō Māori.
Family wants the